Hey guys, welcome back to Extreme IE. In this video, we're going to take a look at the actual user interface, and I want to look at this thing called a workload profile. This is where we're going to get to see all of the information that Tetration is gathering for our servers. And so I'm in Tetration now. I have everything highlighted for my Austin location. So we have many different labs here in Cisco. I'm going to expand Austin, and I want to scroll down here. I want to find my terminal server. And let's take a look at this Windows server. Let's see what we can see. So the first thing right off the bat that you'll notice is this traffic volume. This is essentially where Tetration is going to let you know how the server is doing on a daily basis. You can narrow this down to, as you can see, a 1 hour granularity if you want to see just at a high level how much network traffic and how many total packets this server is consuming, again, per hour. We will dive deeper into what Tetration gathers from a networking perspective. Can we troubleshoot it? Can we see latency? Can we see packet drops? The answer is yes to all that, all those questions, but we'll dive into that probably in another video. You can see that we obviously glean the host name of this particular server. We also glean the operating system. And again, what I want you guys to realize is that we're not collecting this information just because we want to. We're not collecting this information just because you're going to come in here and you're going to watch this like it's Netflix. We're collecting this information because you may want to use it in an actual policy. So for example, I could say any server that has WinTS in the host name, allow it access to the finance database server. Or I could say any server that has WinTS in the host name and is a 2016 server, but only standard, allow it access to the database server. So everything that you're going to see in this workload profile is something that we can use in order to create a dynamic policy. And that's the key, right? We're not depending on a firewall to give us, source destination IP address. We're not depending on some other mechanism to gain that information. We are going to glean just a ton of information from Tetration that we can use to actually create a policy. Now, I want to draw your eye to this user annotation piece here. What these are, let me actually grab my pen here because I want to be able to write over the screen. You'll notice that there's a couple of different, what we would call labels or tags that are coming in from various different environments or various different other pieces of technology that's living in my environment. So for example, I have a CMDB that's integrated here into Tetration. So I'm able to grab things like what application, or who does that application belong to? Who's the business unit? Or what environment is that in? Is it production? Is it test? Where is it and whose is it? You'll notice that I'm gleaning 6 labels right now from my CMDB. So I'm grabbing what is the scope, in other words, what does it belong to, what kind of a server is it, what's the function, is it standalone, is it a member of a cluster maybe it's a database cluster or something like that, and obviously you can read. But one of the cool things that I want to bring your attention to is the actual labels that are coming in from ICE. So I can actually see what my SGT is, and I can also see if that machine has authenticated to the network. In this case, the machine has authenticated to the network, and obviously it belongs to some kind of a user group. So we have put my terminal server into my SGT of users. And what's really important here, and this is where I really want to make sure that you guys understand, is that I can use these labels in a policy. So I can say if that SGT is equal to the user group, right? So if that's where we've placed that particular machine, and we're just going to write authenticated. If the authentication is true, right, then I'm going to allow this machine access to, the HR database server or something like that, right? If one of these things is not true, so if that security group isn't in the user group, or if the authentication is false, then we don't allow it access. And so these are things that we can dynamically do within our environment without having to constantly go and make firewall rule changes. Tetration and ICE will, through their integration, automatically out of the box. In fact, I'll show you that really, really quick. Let me just go to, where is it, connectors here, virtual appliances, and I don't think I have any. Let's look at connectors here. You can see all the different connectors that we have. So here I can go in and I can deploy ICE, I can enable it, I can go right through the wizard. I was hoping that I had a virtual server that was deployed already where I could do this. I don't. But again, you can see that it's really just a wizard. So I don't have to do anything crazy here. I don't have to do any crazy APIs. I don't have to do any exports or imports. I can literally just come here, enable the ICE connector, and I can instantly start pulling some of these annotations that you'll see within Tetration, right? And there's more. These are just the only two that I'm using. Next, I want to look at the long-lived profile, the long-lived processes rather. Now, what are these? This is any process that lasts more than 5 minutes on a particular server. And when that process is running for more than 5 minutes, what you'll see is that we actually glean just a plethora of information of what that process is. So first of all, we're going to see who actually started that process. We're going to see who was actually the author of it, right? What username was used to kick that off. And this is really cool because it brings that services view that you would normally have to go in, log into a server, go to the services console, or you'd have to look up task manager. It kind of brings it all into one view for you. So you can see the process ID, you can see when those processes last changed, how long they've been up for. You can also see the CPU and RAM usage right from one window. And then lastly, you can see something really big, which is the process hash. And you can actually not only look up within Tetration, Tetration will do a process hash lookup, if you will. So you can see here I'm hovering over it. You'll see the pop-up to bring us to virus total. So we can do it ourselves if we want to. We can look up and see if this is a malicious process or not. Tetration itself will also give it an anomaly score based on that process to see if it actually is a malicious process or not, if that process is anomalous, if it's something we haven't seen before in our environment. Tetration will do that kind of lookup on its own. And what's really cool is, again, I can use this all inside of a policy. So I can say, for example, if I see Internet Explorer running, right, allow it access to a terminal server or allow it access to a specific environment. Now I have an example of that in a sample global rules. So in here, you'll notice that I'm looking for a certain version of VMware tools. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking for a certain version of VMware tools, and it's not only looking for a package that's installed in a specific version, right? So in this case, anything that's running that particular version of VMware tools, I will allow it access to anything in the data center that has RFC 1918 address space. So you can use all of this information again to create a policy. I could also look for a specific process hash. And then this allows me to do a couple different things. Number one, I can create a policy to allow access to data center resources based on a process hash, or if I am compromised and an attacker comes into my environment and installs a malicious process, I can, if I'm able to hunt down and I'm able to find what new process that is, which by the way, Tetration will flag it. I just have to pay attention to the alert. I have to go in, I have to see what it is. Once I see what that new process hash is, I can go in and I can say, you know what, Tetration, if you see this process hash, if you see this process running on any one of my servers, instantly deny it access to everything in the data center, and Tetration will do that. Now the process snapshot is where Tetration will actually draw a picture of how all of these different processes on this machine are kicked off and started. And so this is where Tetration starts to memorize, learn, and understand the actual everyday behavior of this particular machine. So what it's doing is it's learning how all of the different processes and parent processes and sub-processes are kicked off and started on a daily basis. And as Tetration learns that typical behavior, it basically baselines and memorizes what is normal for this particular server. And whenever these processes get out of whack, if somebody starts changing things, if I log in via, RDP and all of a sudden I start changing processes, I start turning off, Windows Explorer, or I turn off IIS and I install Apache, or, I uninstall Apache and then I reinstall Apache, but it's a different version. As I start doing things, or, if this machine becomes compromised, Tetration will begin to actually alarm and alert and say, hey, I'm seeing this process stop and this process start. And by the way, this is the user that did it, and this is the machine that they logged in from. So Tetration will start to learn and understand all of those different processes to be able to tell us when things change from the normal baseline. Interfaces, pretty self-explanatory, right? So we're going to gain every single, what could be virtual interface, physical interface that's on the particular server, and the MAC address. Again, you can gain this from logging into that particular server, but it's nice to have all of this in one user interface where you're not having to log in, log out, open multiple consoles, etc. Now, packages, this is where we're going to learn every single software package that's installed on this server. So this is where I would say, okay, we are running this version of VMware tools. Let's throw that into a policy. So again, if I come back to my sample here, I could say, look, I'm looking for that exact version of VMware tools, but we may also want to flag certain versions of antivirus or certain versions of particular software. So for example, perhaps we have approved a certain version of Apache, and we know that there are certain versions of Apache that are susceptible to certain exploits, right? Certain vulnerabilities. So we could create a policy in our environment that says, only these versions of Apache are allowed to talk to that HR database server or that super top secret database server. If it's on a different version of Apache, we won't allow it to talk. So again, we don't expect you to come in here and look at all of this stuff like it's like, you're watching the evening news. We expect you to come in here and say, okay, this is the exact version of software that I'm running. We give that to you so then you can take that and put it into a policy. Vulnerabilities, this is where, pretty self-explanatory, right? This is where we're gonna see all the different vulnerabilities on this particular endpoint. We're not only gonna see the CVE, which by the way, I can select this, will bring me right out to NIST so I can see more about that vulnerability, but it's gonna tell me what is vulnerable and what I need to look for. It's basically the same information that's in the vulnerability dashboard, which I've gone over in a couple videos, but this is just for this workload. So you're not seeing everything that the particular application is vulnerable to. You're just looking at these vulnerabilities or at this particular server. This tab tells us exactly what the Tetration configuration is. What's really interesting about Tetration is you can have different configurations per environment. So, in other vendors that compete against Tetration, one of the things that you'll do is, you install an agent and that's it, you're done, right? You have really no control over how much CPU that agent uses. You have no control over how much memory. You have no control over whether you want to enforce policies or not. You can't turn on or turn off different features. And so within Tetration, you have the ability to say, hey, look, you know what? I don't want to allow broadcast traffic, or hey, you know what? I want to cap the CPU or the RAM, right? So it's really customizable, really simple and really customizable. Stats, this is where you're going to understand exactly what that workload is doing. And this is where I think a lot of people get concerned when it comes to running, especially a software agent on your server, right? You're going to say, well, what if all of a sudden there's a memory leak, or what if how do I control and make sure that you're not overutilizing the CPU? Well, again, I just showed you in here, this is where you can control that. I have mine set to unlimited and I've given it 6% CPU and 512 meg of RAM. But again, you could drop that down. I think the default is actually 3% of your CPU. So you can modify that. And then again, you can come in and you can check that here. So you can actually see that right now on this particular terminal server, you can see the different features that I have turned on. So I have visibility, I have enforcement, and I have forensics. You can see exactly what they're doing. So visibility is down here at like almost nothing, right? The enforcement is up here at 0.36% of my CPU. And then the forensic feature, again, where I would see, hey, is there any weird processes going on? That's at what, 0.12? So very minimal CPU. And then the same thing over here when it comes to memory overhead. Even though I have my agents actually set to be able to use 512 meg of RAM, right, which is a lot. You don't really have to set it that way. I just do it because obviously it's a lab and we like to break things. But you'll see right here that the max that I'm using is 143K at this exact moment, and you can see they're pretty flat. So again, you can go in and you can see all of the statistics around that particular workload. The policies, this is where if I was enforcing any policies, you would be able to see what policies are actually being enforced. I've shown that in another video. And then lastly, container policies. Now I'm on a Windows host, so we don't yet support containers on a Windows host, but if I was on a Linux server and we were enforcing container policies with Kubernetes or OpenShift, you would see all of those container policies here. So again, you'd be able to see the regular policies enforced down to the VM or the server itself. in addition to the container policies, which again, they may be different policies. You may be allowing or denying different things at a per pod level in Kubernetes, and you may not be allowing that physical server access to other things, as a whole. And then here's where we can see what we label as network anomalies, right? If there were any, let me back up here for a second. So Tetration does monitor the amount of data leaving a server at a given time. And so again, with that baselining, it does remember what that server typically does. It is looking at all the network traffic in and out of that particular workload. And so if all of a sudden Tetration sees a massive amount of data leaving that workload, the network anomaly graph is going to shoot through the roof. And we can send off an alert if all of a sudden we see a massive amount of data leaving that particular endpoint. Now, I've kind of thrown a lot at you in the last 15 minutes, and I kind of talked fast, right? The goal of everything I've shown you, again, is not to have, 14 people sitting here and learning all of these different things and saying, oh, okay, look at all these cool processes and going through this. No, Tetration wants you to be able to use this information to create a policy, to make your environment more secure, to understand not only what your servers are actually doing. Suppose you're doing a cloud migration and you want to understand, okay, we're running this process. Here's the username that starts it, and that we need to migrate or make sure can log into Active Directory. But oh, by the way, that process also doesn't need as much RAM and CPU as we thought it needed. Let's go ahead and back it down. Or, oh, you know what? We're maxing it out. Let's give it more. Not only are we doing it for that purpose, but again, we also want to make sure that you have the right amount of data to create a really fine-grained policy. So this is the workload profile. This is everything that Tetration is going to collect. And in the end, the whole goal of Tetration is to take all of that data and allow you to map it out like you see here. So if I go to my application view, the ability to say, okay, we're going to put these 3 servers. So if I come down here and we see these, I have 3 servers here. They're all web servers. The ability to say, you know what, I'm going to put all these servers in a web tier, or I'm going to put all these 2 servers in an app tier, or these servers in a database tier. The reason why Tetration is doing this is because it's using behavioral analytics, and it's saying all 3 of these database servers are running the same exact thing. They're all running the same processes. They're running MySQL. All 3 of them are having the same conversations with the same other groups of servers. And so we're going to put these 3 servers into their own group. If you're familiar with ACI, this is like automatic EPGs, right? This is an endpoint group that is based off of behavior. Okay, it's not something that people are guessing or they're trying to put together. Tetration is actually doing this on its own because of everything that it's learning. And then again, if you watch the other video on data collection, you'd say, well, you talked about load balancers. Yes, these little green bubbles here are the load balancers, and Tetration is automatically injecting within this map where the load balancer should be. It's doing that because it's integrated with a load balancer. So as Tetration gets the feed, the IPFix data from the load balancer, and it's also gaining all of the in and outbound packets to my web servers, it's saying, oh, okay, I'm comparing that feed with the load balancer, I'm comparing that feed with the web servers, and I'm seeing that these campus users are actually going through this load balancer in order to get to the web tier. So that's how Tetration is putting all of this data together in order to not only map out your application so you see how it works, but also give you a very detailed, fine-grained policy in order to secure it and not break it. So I hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next one.